Good evening. I'm Rebecca Hoogs, and I have the great pleasure of serving as the Executive Director of Seattle Arts and Lectures. Welcome to a special event with Oliver Jeffers. As we begin, I want to acknowledge that wherever you are joining us from, we are all on unceded lands of Indigenous people. Here in Seattle, we stand on the traditional lands of the Coast Salish peoples, including the Duwamish, Suquamish, Stillaguamish, and Muckleshoot people. We recognize the stewardship of this land where we now live and work, and the disruption of their care by colonization. We are grateful for their continued stewardship of these lands. At SAL, we are committed to supporting and building relationships with Native communities through real action, connecting with the Duwamish tribe through Real Rent Duwamish, and learning about, featuring, and sharing the work of Indigenous writers and thinkers. To learn more about our work in this area and SAL's commitment to racial equity, please visit lectures.org/about. Thank you. If you are joining us in person tonight, welcome. Thank you for joining us to celebrate Oliver Jeffers and his just-released book, Begin Again. And if you are joining us online tonight, welcome. Wherever you are, whoever you are also a part of tonight's story. Our huge thanks go to the many partners who have made this evening possible. Thanks to our season presenting sponsor, the Seattle Times. Thank you to tonight's book-selling partner, Queen Anne Book Company. Queen Anne is shipping your books directly to you, so please keep an eye on your mailbox. Thank you to our media partner for this evening, The Stranger. Thanks to our organizational supporters, all of whom are thanked on our website. And special thanks for major support goes to Amazon, the Amazon Literary Partnership, Arts Fund, the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, the City of Seattle Office of Arts and Culture, the Echo Fund, the Edgewater Hotel, the Four Seasons, the Marguerite Casey Foundation, Microsoft, the National Endowment for the Arts, the National and Family Foundation, the Thompson Hotel, the Washington State Arts Commission, and the Washington State Department of Commerce. I want to thank our board, our volunteers, and our small but mighty staff of 13 who make all of our programs possible. And finally, thanks to all of you for joining us this year and believing in the transformative power of stories. Could we have a big round of applause for all of our supporters? So the format for this evening will be a presentation by Oliver Jeffers, followed by a Q&A moderated by Julia Kuo. Julia Kuo is the author and illustrator of Let's Do Everything and Nothing and Luminous, Living Things That Light Up the Night. She is the illustrator of many picture and specialty books, including the best-selling book, Rise. Julia has created editorial illustrations for publications such as the New York Times, Wall Street Journal, and The Economist, and her books are also available at the Queen Anne table in the lobby. Julia will incorporate as many of your questions into the conversation as we have time for. You can submit a question for the conversation or vote your favorite questions to the top by going to slido.com and entering the code SAL Jeffers. The Q&A access information is also in the pre-event email, which was sent to all ticket holders. If you need any support, if you're watching online, you can email us at boxoffice@lectures.org. And if you're posting about tonight's event, we hope you'll tag SAL and use the hashtag SalJeffers. It is our tradition here at SAL to always begin our events with a reading by a writer from our Writers in the Schools or Youth Poetry Fellowship programs. This year, we will serve more than 4,500 public school students at 34 public schools and at Seattle Children's Hospital. Tonight's writer is Avery Brown from Renaissance School of Art and Reasoning, and they will be introduced by their writer-in-residence, David Lasky. Please join me in welcoming David Lasky and Avery Brown.
I'm a wits writer and actually a graphic novelist. Last spring, I got to teach graphic novel one day every week at the Renaissance School of Art and Reasoning in Sammamish, Washington. It's a small and amazing middle school that nurtures creativity in students. Among the best writers and artists there was Avery Brown, who always gave 100% to anything she did. I'm thrilled to introduce Avery tonight, who wrote this poem of questions inspired by Pablo Neruda's The Book of Questions, or El Libro de los Preguntos. I'm sorry, that was probably Las Preguntas. Avery also illustrated it with care as a poetry comic. Avery is smart, dynamic, thoughtful and brave, but don't take my word for it. Here's Avery.
Hi, my name is Avery Brown. It's very wonderful to be here tonight, especially considering that I grew up being read the works of Oliver Jeffers, so it's a bit of a full circle moment for me, you could say. This is a poem that I wrote last year, and it is accompanied by my own illustrations, so please enjoy. Dear Universe, why did you put us here? If we are bound for destruction, why, despite all, do you keep existing? Why keep growing and changing to just disappear someday? Why do you tolerate me? Don't all the questions make you sick? Dearest universe, I don't know why you do it, but I hope you'll stick with us until the end, because we need the assistance. Thank you.
Thank you, Avery. It is an enormous delight to welcome Oliver Jeffers to Seattle Arts and Lectures in celebration of his new book, Begin Again: How We Got Here and Where We Might Go, Our Human Story So Far. Jeffers' books include How to Catch a Star, Lost and Found, and the New York Times bestsellers Here We Are, What We'll Build, Stuck, This Moose Belongs to Me, and Once Upon an Alphabet. He is also, of course, the illustrator of the #1 smash hits, The Day the Crayons Quit and The Day the Crayons Came Home, both written by Drew DeWalt. His fine art is world-renowned, and his dip art exhibitions are much sought-after events. Originally from Belfast, Northern Ireland, Oliver now splits his time between Belfast and Brooklyn. Perhaps you are, like me, a parent or caregiver, and you found your way to Jeffers' books through rereading and rereading one of his many picture books to your baby or toddler. Maybe you even, as I did, would sort of strategically put his books at the top of the pile, or suggest, how about this one? The best picture books are visual and verbal delights for child and parent alike, and Jeffers' books fall squarely into that category. And thus, you can imagine how delighted I was to learn of Jeffers' new book, which is explicitly for readers of all ages. In this book, Jeffers offers us a visual history of the state of the world and where we might go from here, and how we might go from here. I have come to believe, quote, he says, that people are all simply a collection of stories. The stories we are told and the stories we tell. We have a responsibility, he argues, to be both careful and collectively minded with the story of our shared future. So whether you are sleepless because of a tiny person waking you up in the night, or sleepless at the state of the world, his work offers us a way to articulate why we are wide awake and how to feel hopeful and connected in spite. So please join me in beginning again with the teller of stories, the shower of stories, and the changer of stories, Oliver Jeffers.
All right. There is hope in the world, I think. So, all right, quick show of hands. Who here is optimistic about our future? Okay, good. Who here sort of feels we're a bit lost and it's all pointless? Okay, not as many people as I thought. This is good. This is good. We're working with good material here. So, right, we're going to do another show of hands. If you're a glass half empty person, you're going to put up your left hand, and if you're a glass half empty or full person, you're going to put up your right hand. Go. Oh, actually, that didn't really work, did it? Either way, look, at least there's some water in the glass, I suppose. I think that you can have a glass of water, and as long as there's a wee bit in the bottom to share around, that's all right. Right, moving on to something else. Hands up, another show of hands. Who liked to draw as a child? Okay, hands up if you've drawn in the last 10 years. Hands up if you've drawn in the last 5 years. Keep your hands up. If you've drawn in the last 2 years, keep your hands up. In the last year? Okay, now, of those with their hands still up, who's good at drawing? Define good. I made a book once with Owen Colfer, and his son asked me, his son was 12, or no, his son was 16 at the time, and he said, "Oliver, why are your drawings so popular?" And it took me a second to realize that it was not a compliment. I used to not be very good at drawing. This is the way I used to draw people, which is not very good. But then I went to art college and I studied form and function and light and shadow and art history and art perspective. And I got a third level education, a first class honors degree in visual communication. And I can now draw people like this, which is so much better. Don't you wish you could draw that well? I think that I've got so good at drawing that I can draw a black and white drawing of a crayon, and you'll be able to tell me what color it is. Shall we try this? Okay. What color is this crayon? It is beige. Yes. Okay, we'll do another one. What color is this crayon? You're right. And clearly it's the high skill of my line drawing that you can tell. Right, we'll do one last one. What color of crayon is this? What did I tell you? Right, now I've got so good at drawing that it is difficult to tell which one is the drawing and which one is not the drawing. And like, for example, a portrait. Do you want to see this demonstrated? Okay, I will need a volunteer, though. Okay, somebody's hand shot up, right? Oh, they're on their way already. I don't have a choice about this. Okay, or whatever way you want to get up. See if you can roll up. Okay, right. Okay, come over here. What's your name? Doc?
No, and I have your book.
Oh, fantastic. Okay, now you got to stand there. You got to stand there, right? Now you got to stay really still. Okay, let me see how still you can stand. 1, 2, 3, go. That's good. Wait. I know I'm fast, but I'm not that fast. Okay, right, 1, 2, 3, still, go. Okay, now, I'm going to draw you. Okay. Yes, didn't I get it? Yes. Oh, wait, you must have moved. Did you move? Okay. Thank you, Knox. You can actually sit down now. So I have always loved drawing. You know, I did learn about 20 years ago, actually more than that because I've been doing this for a long time. I did learn about 30 years ago that was probably the thing that I wanted to do with my life, and that it had value, both transactional value and entertainment value. By the way, my accent is from Belfast, and if those of you, I know that I was introduced. For those of you who don't know where Belfast is, it's there. But for 20 years, I have drawn lots of pictures and lots of books that I have mostly written, and people do ask me where I get my ideas from. And I always say they're true stories, which they're not. I mean, I make them up. So I lie professionally to children. But for 20 years, I've been doing this, and although actually Stuck is not, that's a true story. Stuck is a true story. I really did get a kite stuck in a tree, and I threw increasingly larger objects into that tree to get it loose, although I started exaggerating at a certain point, and I didn't get the kite back. But, you know, so these stories that I was making were, I thought, simple distractions, mostly enjoyed by children, and some of them were just simple, joyous stories. Some of them have leaned towards some of the heavier and darker emotions and themes that I was thinking about. Like, for example, The Heart in the Bottle deals with like that self-destruction that comes from a bitter grieving process, or The Fate of Fausto is about really the folly of greed and ignorance and arrogance, and when a man who's trying to prove he owns the ocean, he ultimately erases himself. And as much as I love storytelling, I have always thought of myself first and foremost as an artist. I had a career in the fine art world for several decades before I even got into picture books. And I've always been making art that tries to question and understand the world around me. So, for example, whenever my wife asked me, how do you grade art? I was like, that's a really good question. She's an engineer. And so I started looking at different ways that you could see the world from different ways. On the left here is a painting called Fathom Painting Number 1. I ended up doing a bunch. And I've painted the ocean. And you can sort of see that it's constantly changing. And I've put in measurements of how deep the water is there in fathoms. Kind of to show sometimes it's very hard to measure things that can't really be measured. But in doing so, I was working with a marine biologist, and he told me something really fascinating. He said, because I was asking him to provide some of the maps of some of the places that I wanted to paint. And he said that, did you know that planet Earth is only the 5th best mapped object in our solar system? We have better maps of the moon, Mercury, Mars, and Venus. And quite simply, that's because we haven't really paid a lot of attention to our own oceans. On the right is a dip painting series, which was referenced in the introduction. And I paint these portraits fully based on people who have experienced death close hand. And then as part of this ceremony, I submerge it in paint in front of them, and no photographs exist. And it is about the vulnerability of memory and how we use, I suppose, knowing how finite life is as a way to project ourselves forward into an unknown future. I've thought that art was a very different enterprise to, say, illustrated storytelling, like classic illustrated storytelling, because those projects, they have a beginning and a middle and an end. And being Irish, I've learned how to be a good storyteller. Growing up in Belfast, everybody's a good storyteller. And the secret to telling a good story is timing. But I get called an illustrator as much as I get called an artist, and there is a difference, which I have decided I would illustrate for you. So the difference between illustration and art is that in illustration, you're solving somebody else's problem. In art, you're creating your own problems. In illustration, you agree a fee before you start making something. And in art, you make something and then you try to sell it. And in illustration, someone's going to give you the okay. And in art, you will forever marinate in self-doubt. So I've never really known what to call myself, but I think I'd probably lean towards artist, though, because I definitely make my own problems and marinate in self-doubt, but only on Tuesdays. though at one point when I was doing this art project at a United Nations climate conference in Glasgow called COP26, I did this sculpture in the blue zone, which is for the world leaders only, and the business leaders. But when I was registering, they didn't have a box to check for artist. The young Senegalese woman who registered me, she said, "Oh, I'm sorry, but look, I put you down as an observer and a translator. Is that okay?" And I was like, "Actually, that's kind of exactly what I do." It's a much better description, I realized right away, than anything else. Because, so I thought that these worlds of stories and the worlds of art were very, very different endeavors, different parts of me. But almost 10 years ago, that all really began to change when they kind of merged together. And the turning point was in 2015, and I had a son. My wife and I had our first son. We have a daughter now too. And, they just let you leave the hospital. They don't make you do a test or anything. But we brought him home to where he was born. He was born in New York, and we took him to our apartment, and being polite, like he's never been here before. He's like, "Well, welcome home, son. This is where you live. This is our front door. This is your apartment. This is our living room where we keep our collection of chairs." And we kind of went on like that. And what began as comedy, like explaining everything that I saw to someone who didn't speak English at all, was hilarious. So I thought, but then I started to realize that actually there's something kind of heavy about this. Like, he really doesn't know anything, and it's going to be up to us to teach him everything. But then that turned over time into, and actually that realization was what began the movie adaptation of Here We Are, where it's the feeling of being lost and the responsibility of being a parent. But then more recently, that has turned into another realization, which is we all arrive on Earth as untold stories. And there's something very powerful about that notion that I've been thinking a lot about. So anyway, as I was explaining these things I was seeing around me, I was tending to stick to just like the simple beauty, and the simple being the operative word, of what it is to be alive here in the world and now in time. And partly, I think, it was to protect him from what felt like an angrier and scarier world than usual. It was back on the side of the Atlantic that we came from. We were dealing with a lot of anger and division, and everywhere in the world it seemed like there was a lot of shouting and blame, and the general consensus was that we were sliding backwards somehow. So what began as a letter to him about the simple joys of being alive on Earth now turned into a book called Here We Are, Notes for Living on Planet Earth. And it really is, it's about the basic principles of what it is to be a functioning member of society in the 21st century. And I thought that other people would benefit from these really simple truths I was telling him and reminding myself of, like, people come in many shapes, sizes, and colors. We may all look different, act different, and sound different, but don't be fooled, we are all people. So if you're giving somebody a tour, with my son, it started at the front door, you have to give them some context. So you have to start with where they are. And for the book, I decided, let's start with Earth is in our solar system. And as a result of that, a central aspect of the book became the Earth's place in our cosmos. And in researching this, I came across a phenomenon known as the overview effect, which occurs to the human mind when it ventures far enough from the surface of our planet to actually see the entirety of this object as one single thing. And it causes a massive cognitive shift in the way we think about everything. And it's something really only astronauts have ever felt. But then again, maybe not, because having grown up in Northern Ireland, which is actually there, trying to explain our politically interesting history to, the nuance of our identity and the fights that we were getting into, to very smart people, actually even in Britain, where I was having to explain to English people the difference between the United Kingdom, Great Britain, and the British Isles, and the level of ignorance was sort of striking. But whenever I was trying to do that on the other side of the ocean, when we moved to New York in 2007, from that vantage point, it suddenly just seemed that the fighting between us back where I was from just seemed pathetic, and nothing other than a poignant and tragic waste of life and energy. And I recognized the way that I was speaking about Northern Ireland from this distance across an ocean was not that dissimilar to how astronauts talked about the Earth from the moon. Anyway, the summer after my son was born, there was a lot of violence again back in Belfast that we watched in the news from New York, and it was the same as when I was growing up. It was kids that were out there rioting and throwing petrol bombs and doing all sorts, and it's like, what do they really know of the nuance of this conflict? They're just doing this because they've been told a story by their parents and their peers who to hate, and so they're hating. And I could see suddenly that maybe I didn't have to tell my son the same story that I was told of where I was from. Maybe I could tell him something different, better, so that he might see it differently. My daughter too. And we only recently, my daughter's 5, and there was the 25th anniversary of the Good Friday Agreement, and we were explaining what we were doing, and she was like, wait, there was a war here? She's like, Harlan, there was a war here! And she ran off thinking this was really exciting. But everything can change depending on depending on where we see it from and how we choose to see it. So on Apollo 8, which was the first one that went around the moon, to try and find a landing spot for Apollo 11 a couple of years later. And that was where that famous Earthrise photograph was taken, when they came around the moon and then they actually looked at Earth for the first time, because it hadn't occurred to them to look back. They were struck by the beauty of it, and they took that photograph. But 3 very intelligent astronauts, they couldn't work out what part of the Earth they were looking at. They could see a giant bit of land, but they couldn't work out which bit it was. And it took them longer than they cared to admit that they were looking at the bottom half of Africa. The reason they didn't recognize it is because it was sideways. And from space, it's pretty obvious that there is no up, there is no down. It's a ball floating in space. We've made north at the top of the map. It's an arbitrary story that we tell ourselves to make sense out of chaos. So I made this map the wrong way around, but labeled it the right way up, because suddenly doing this, something that seems very familiar can seem quite foreign, like that, when you view it from another perspective. And even today, most of humanity's conflicts come from the ideas of national identity and immigration, from man-made problems that have nothing to do really with our place in a cosmos. So maybe we're all artists, actually, because it seems we all too make our own problems and marinate in self-doubt. This is the only place where people live, and the only borders we truly should have are where the land meets the sea. But if we get far enough away from this, can we see our entire context differently? And can I show people this thing that I was feeling in a bigger capacity? Do these lines that divide us matter? I could see clearly that they didn't. In fact, they did matter, but not in a way that improved us, only a way that impeded us. So in the UK, we were given a large sum of money for an art application. This is a thing that happens in other countries, by the way. The government gives artists money to make art projects that is not tied to some building development. So the scale between the moon and the Earth is one thing, but it's a drop in the ocean, really, compared to the vastness of it all. And this does terrify some people, but anything that's good about being alive happens only here. And here is kind of a long way from anywhere else. So here is the...
This is planet Earth. It's your home. And everyone else's. We've always thought that it's so big that it needs broken down into smaller pieces between who we are and who we're not. But really, Earth is not so big. If we shrank it all down so a single step took us to the moon, it is still a 3-hour walk to Pluto. What would it be like to look back at ourselves from out there? Let's find out.
So we did. Our Place in Space was born. It was a project where it looked at Earth, it put Earth at the center of the universe, because I know that we revolve around the sun, but if this is the only place where stories exist and anything means anything, maybe in some other capacity we are the center of the universe. It's an accurate scale model of our solar system, and I mean accurate to a millimeter. We work with the professor of astrophysics in Oxford University, and the scale was reduced to 591 million to 1. And that puts the sun at about 12 feet across. And the first 4 planets were spread out over a third of a mile. Those are the rocky planets. And as the distances were kind of vast, and a very important thing for this to work was you had to be able to understand the distance. Like if you can walk around a room, you understand how far away that wall is, or that whatever, you understand spatial distance. So you had to be able to work out where the next planet was, and to get around the fact that the planets were kind of tiny and really far apart. We built these giant housing devices with like Vegas-style neon signs and arrows. And see, if you look in the curve of the arch, you can see a little dot. That's Venus. And Venus is the same size as Earth. So as we approach the Earth, that's my daughter modeling for scale a little bit. As you get closer to the Earth, you can kind of see how far the moon is from it. And this is about maybe 300 meters from the sun, not that far. Put it this way, to walk from the sun on our scale, it would take 4 minutes. It takes light 8 minutes to reach Earth from the sun. So the walking speed was twice the speed of light. And after a 3-hour walk or a 7-mile walk, you get to Pluto that was really this size. And somebody once said it was the most satisfying anticlimax they've ever experienced. And this is still rotating around the same thing that is miles away. But when you look at Earth on this scale, it's smaller than a ping pong ball. And one step takes you to the moon. And even if you take that one step and you look at the Earth when it's that far away, it's clear to see that isolationist thinking in terms of how we solve the great future problems is laughably futile, because you know what? Germs and weather do not need passports. So, as said by one of the Apollo crew, we're going to have to start acting as one species with one destiny. We are not going to survive if we don't start doing that. This is the only place where people live. And are we putting the fragile brilliance of human consciousness to the best possible use? When COVID hit, my family and I ended up back in Northern Ireland to care for my dad. And from this vantage point, we watched a pretty brutal election campaign back here across that same ocean. And it was rather horrifying to recognize I was starting to see some similarities to the Northern Ireland I knew growing up, where one group's identity was primarily based on the existence of a perceived enemy. And that, like in Northern Ireland in the 70s, and even right up to now, people here and in other places seem to be all prioritizing being right over anything else. I started to ask myself, well, what is it people really want with this one go we get at the business of being alive? I heard it once said, and something my mother-in-law says a lot as a way to bring context to kind of any situation, sure, you'll be dead a long time. And I think we've forgotten that. In this age of tiny attention spans, we have lost a sense of context, but also a sense of purpose and, more importantly, hope. So I began thinking about the history and the trajectory of the human story and trying to see if I could understand why people were acting the way that they were. Given the fragile and shifting nature of life as we know it, on a thin layer of climate, on the only place that we know can harbor life, and one that is changing before our eyes, how we choose to imagine our own future will entirely determine it. That perhaps if we started to see it in a matter of solutions rather than problems, we might actually see radical improvement in the human experience in real time. Because you know what? Yes, this is where all of the problems exist, but it's also where all of the solutions will be found. In this book, The Operating Manual for Spaceship Earth, that was written in the 60s, Buckminster Fuller puts forward the idea that if we treated our planet as a mechanical vehicle, which actually in many senses it is, it's the vessel through which we are all passengers floating through space, that we would treat it much differently than we do. You know, if you own a car, if it's electric, you know you have to plug it in. If it's gas, you know you have to top it up. If the tires deflate, you have to inflate them, so on. You look after it as a piece of equipment, as a mechanical vehicle, and we definitely don't do that. In fact, we probably are too distracted or arguing over what to play on the radio to even notice the smoke coming out of the engine. There is an old Irish saying that there are none so blind as those who don't want to see. And maybe that's where we are. No one wants to see, but why not? Is it maybe because we can't see where we as individuals fit in, so therefore it's just easier not to see? On page 1 of that book, The Operating Manual for Spaceship Earth, Buckminster Fuller says that if you're on a shipwreck and a piano comes along, it would make an excellent flotation device. But the best way to design a flotation device is not necessarily to make it look like a piano. But that is exactly what we as a species have done for way too long. Just because it's worked once doesn't mean that's the best way to do it. So we are going to need to reimagine things, and maybe that's the first step, is just telling better stories, ones that we can all get behind, because we are a story-driven species. And you're right, I've always thought that any human is a combination of stories. The stories that they're told, the stories told about us, and the stories they tell, that's it. And I said that just there now. But it is, if you think about that, I'm going to go back there actually, because the stories that we're told, that's our context, that's the where we come from, what our ancestors experienced. If the stories told about us, that's our reputation. And the stories that we tell, the ones that we project out, that's our personality. But the most important story of all is the story that we tell ourselves. And that's our fuel for how we propel ourselves forward. It's the story of the sort of person that we can be. And I've come to realize, and it's one of the most important breakthroughs I had as an artist, you can always, always change the story. Tell a better one. Draw pictures, not conclusions. This is the job of art, I think. And I also think that we've undervalued art in many ways. Anybody here in education? A few people. I'm sure you've heard of STEM education. So science, technology, engineering, and maths. I was doing a lot of panel events on STEM education in South by Southwest earlier this year. I kept sort of pointing out to people, like, somebody put an A in there at one point, and it became STEAM education. And the A being for art, and art being stories, music, theater, painting. How is it we know more about those 4 other planets than we do about our own? Because with the peacetime prosperity after World War II, when there was the money and the technology available, 2 countries were too heavily invested in this story of winning this race that they put all their money into up there and none into under our oceans. That is the power of story. And in my opinion, the A is the most important letter in there. And I did actually manage to convince some scientists of that, because I pointed out science is how we do things, but art is why we do them. Being an artist is not really seen as a proper job, though, and often in school it's for the kids who don't know what else to do. But we learn how to read a picture, a room, a face, before we learn how to read words. But yet art is often seen as decoration or entertainment in society. When I was doing a lot of those conferences with scientists, after I would do a workshop, and it would be the first time some of these guys, these scientists had picked up a paintbrush in 20 years, 30 years, 40 years on one occasion. And they kept saying, I was like, oh, this is amazing. How can I take what you do to make what I do more understandable? And I was just thinking, that is the wrong question. It's the wrong question. What you're looking for, basically what you're asking for, is a pretty PDF. You're looking for the icing on the cake, decoration, but art is not the icing on the cake. It's not even the cake. It's the table upon which the cake sits. The job of art is to move the ground under your feet so you see the sky differently above your head. To make you question how and why you feel whatever it is you feel and wonder what it is exactly you want. So if our current education system belittles maybe our greatest collective strength, should we be asking ourselves if we're going about it the right way? And there are plenty of people doing that, and they're meeting a lot of resistance. So rather than teaching next generations how to remember facts in a disciplined manner, my dad always used to say, the surest sign of intelligence in another human being is not remembering facts. That just proves you've got a good memory. It's the presence of curiosity and imagination. So maybe we need to start thinking about preparing future contributing members of society more than anything else. Frederick Douglass said that it's easier to build strong children than repair broken men. I, however, have not given up on broken men, women, or adults of any variety. It's the power of the collaboration of an entire species that has accomplished anything great that we ever really have. It's the ability to project ourselves into an unknown future, a future, don't forget, that we will make up, just like we've made up everything else. And it's safe to say that we alone have collectively got ourselves into this, some more so than others. But to think that it's not ours alone to fix, that help is going to come from somewhere else, is akin to really covering your face with your hands if you're going downhill on a bicycle too fast. There is only human beings alone in the universe who can alter our course, can save our ship. But we have done it before. For a man, unlike any other thing in the universe, walks up the stairs of his concepts, emerges ahead of his accomplishments, as said by John Steinbeck. So if we can do that, we can do it again and rethink what it is that our concepts are. So maybe another way of looking at it is that instead of saying we have a climate problem, which I don't think we do, the world is not broken. It's doing exactly what it should with the input put into it. We have a people problem. There are solutions for every climate-related issue there is. We're just not getting behind them. And honestly, that's because there's a lot of people in the climate arena that are debating each other as well. And when you reframe it to think that we just need to settle an argument, that seems so much more doable than we need to change the weather. But what is stopping us from this switch of mindset? I do think it's because we all think that being right is very important. But if we replace the words right and wrong in any conflict, and we put in better and worse, I think it becomes much clearer what needs to be done and what it is we actually want. Have you ever noticed that when you ask someone what they want, they tend to answer with what they don't want? Why do we do this? I have come to think that it's maybe because we all somehow feel that we're wronged, that we were not given the story that we were promised. And the penny dropped for me when I moved back to Northern Ireland and I saw this mural on the Newton Ards Road in East Belfast. And it's a paramilitary mural, and it's, as you can see, it says, "We seek nothing but the elementary right implanted in every man, the right, if you're attacked, to defend yourself." I was like, wait, is that it? Is it just that everybody feels that they're being attacked? And it landed on me that this may explain much of the tone of public discourse on divided issues everywhere, especially places like here. And, as I say, maybe even in the climate arena, that people engage in communication from a place of defensiveness right away, preemptively. That if they think it's right, then it must be wrong. But as I've learned watching my wife be a mother to our kids, I've learned two of the most important geopolitical lessons of my life by watching my wife be the mother she is with our kids. The surest way to get somebody to change their mind is not by telling them they're wrong, which I realized looking from afar in Northern Ireland, that's a pretty major page in the Liberal playbook. I think even no matter where you rate yourself on the political spectrum, we all have to practice empathy. Be gentle with everyone, for we all carry a great weight. I have a theory that I've never met anybody who wanted to be disliked. Just perhaps we don't understand their full story, where it went wrong for them and what miscommunication they've been defending ever since. And I have traveled all over this country on book tours. I've met all sorts of people, Republicans, Democrats, socialists, communists, atheists, religious people, everything. And I have a deep sense that people are much closer than we think. And so in the height of that absolute fervor of the last election, I thought, I'm going to put this to an experiment, because people know that I am a fairly left-leaning liberal. I want to see if I can engage in a conversation where I mitigate that feeling of attack. And so I put up a post saying, calling all Republicans, and I wanted to understand the world they wanted to live in genuinely, so I understood. But the deal was they couldn't mention anything they didn't want. And I think, somehow my instinct was that we're all so busy trying to be understood that we forget to try and understand. And the results was a self-regulating, very healthy discussion that led to the creation of this poem that's in the back of the book. When you dig deep enough by asking the why behind the why enough times, you come to a truth at the heart of it, that all people, no matter who they are, where they're from, or what they believe, just want the same things: a den, a pack, position, and direction. I've started asking friends about how they feel or how they want to feel instead of what they want. And I think it warrants a much rawer response than anything else. And Because, Maya Angelou said once that nobody remembers what you say, they just remember how you made them feel. And as an exercise, I've been trying to test if somebody does feel frustrated or depressed or lost, to cross-reference with this to see which one of these 4 things is absent. And it does become pretty clear pretty quickly. But the one thing I think people forget often is the power that we have within ourselves. So forces beyond your control can take away everything you possess except for one thing: your freedom to choose how you will respond. In our choice of how we choose to feel about things, we need to change how we see them and therefore the story we tell about them. So maybe if we keep asking the why behind the why enough times, we will find that all people are good people and we do want the same things: safety, community, dignity, purpose, and they should not be that hard to get for everybody. So in the wake of the creation of Here We Are, The Fate of Fausto, What We'll Build, which is a poem for my daughter about building a future together, and then my genuine attempt to relay the entirety of human conflict in a 48-page picture book, I have a new book called Begin Again. I'm actually going to show you a little teaser video, and I now realize that I just could have played this short film and saved us all the last 37 minutes, but can't do anything about that now, can we?
So, where are we going? Begin again.
The title Begin Again, I suppose it's more of a suggestion than anything else, and it's using navigation terms. It's like if you kind of know you're going in the wrong way, what do you do?
Where did we begin?
In a way, like there was so many thoughts like cramming into my head and blocking each other at the door, and this book was sort of a way of putting them into some sort of order. It's about greed, it's about community, it's about climate, but really it's about looking at the history of the stories that humans have used to govern ourselves and the trajectory of where we might go.
And wherever we go, we all go together. So all of us must see we are no longer just passengers on this ship.
This is the one place in the universe where life exists. This is the only place that it can exist that we know of. Is this the best use of our time? Beating each other up and drawing imaginary lines. Because I feel both frustrated at the state of the world right now, but I also feel optimistic about people. We are a cooperative species. We are a collective. Our strength as a species has been the ability to work in numbers.
The surprise and safety of fire.
The discovery of fire, which helped our brains create and translate words and communicate with each other, and then basically stories. And looking at that and applying that today, we're all driven by stories.
That's how it always was. The slow passing of stories to and for each other. Stories that give a safe harbor and an idea of where we fit in the long line of time.
As I was making it, I thought, this is not a book for kids. But the more I thought about it, it was like, it's not for kids. But, I think it's aimed at kind of everyone.
For there is wild beauty in this life on earth, and hope wherever you look for it.
Hope is one of the things that really sets humanity apart, the human species apart from everything else, because it is this idea of an unwritten future, of projection towards and trajectory towards an unwritten future. And I think hope is probably the most powerful human emotion that there is. I want people to feel, reading this book, I want them to feel galvanized that it's possible, that we're not all doomed, and that they have a role in whatever this unwritten future will be.
Perhaps a place where we find new ways of using the old ways, using what we find near us to make with the future in mind.
And in a way, maybe this book is like, here's a key. You can get inside yourself and you can turn the steering wheel a little bit.
By creating better stories, bigger ones.
What we do have to do, I think, is begin the story that we're telling ourselves again. Now, do you want me to read this story to you? Okay. Does anybody not want me to? So this is it. It's called Begin Again. It takes about 6 minutes because it's 100 pages. I had a lot of thoughts. And another thing. Where did we begin? With fire, I suppose. The surprise of fire changed our path explosively. It moved us up the ladder. It freed the energy from our bellies to our brains that would create words, see patterns, tell stories, invent the future. No, wait, we began before that. We began with our hands. We needed to light those fires somehow. We picked up debris, put it together, and made tools. A stick and a stone bound to each other became a hammer. Somewhere along the road came a wheel, a drill, a phone, a space rocket. We used these things at first to simply survive, then to explore, then control, and then play. For the first time, we had time. Time to consider beauty, to make for the pleasure of making, live without thought of death. Nope, wait, really, we began before even that. When we emerged on dry land, stood on 2 feet, put one in front of the other, and kept walking. It is our feet that take us where we want to go, but where do we want to go? If the predictions were true, we'd be living in space by now, all of us, beyond the air we breathe and heading further yet. Our sustenance coming from pills, but we are not. We're still here, on this dry land where we've always been, on which we've now drawn imaginary lines so we know who we are and who we're not, and where we belong and where we do not. Taking what we want when we want it. The kings of our castles on our islands of isolation, admired by strangers, safe from those strangers. And remember, in a world full of strangers, we all need to come from somewhere. Though, when you look from far enough, it is clear we all come from Earth, so there is only us. It says people live here in all of the countries. We seek only earthly contentment. After all, we are still simple creatures, which is why we are drawn to an open fire, the sound of a violin, why we embrace the touch of wood and warm light. People like to feel warm, both on the skin and in the heart. Really, what we mostly want is each other. When you think about it, we enjoy giving the right thing more than having it. And the first thing we do after laughing at a good joke or hearing a good story is think, who can we tell it to? That's how it always was. The slow passing of stories to and for each other. Stories that give us safe harbor and an idea of where we fit in the long line of time. Somewhere along that line, it has all started to speed up. The future shortened to the limitations of our own life. This life in which we alone are cast in the starring role, the center of all attention. So where does that bring us? Where are we going again? Well, we don't know where, but it's a race now to get there. Feet running one in front of the other towards easier, faster, newer, cheaper. And as we race, we use these same hands that built space rockets to hold each other back and pull each other down, choosing time and again it's more important to be right over wrong than be better over worse. The difference between right and better is that being right is about proving the past, while being better is about building the future. And we should know by now that while it's wise to keep an eye on the past, for we often repeat our mistakes, if we keep both eyes on the past, we are blind, as we're not going that way. So where are we going? Is our current course worthy of turning thoughts into hammers and hammers into beauty? Maybe not. All right, so where do we go from here? Perhaps to a place where we find new ways of using the old ways. The heat from the stars, the movement of air and water, using what we find near us to make with the future in mind. For purpose and love, not power, for there is already power everywhere. Perhaps to a time when we no longer need to burn the ship we are sailing on to propel us. When we no longer need a them so we can be us, as we are just we, and wherever we go, we all go together. So all of us must see we are no longer just passengers on this ship. We are its only crew. We each have a part to play. We may not be cogs in the machine designed to be replaceable parts, but we are trees in the forest, no one more important than any other. Okay, wait, if that's all true, then how do we get there? By slowing down, by creating better stories, bigger ones, where we all fit inside the same powerful plot, in which we think beyond our own lifetimes, beyond our children's, and theirs, and theirs, and theirs, and theirs. and it's okay to walk there, mostly. For there is wild beauty in this life on earth and hope wherever you look for it. So I made this book, I think, mostly because I wanted to see if I could leave this world better than I found it for my kids. And then I thought, maybe for me, maybe for your kids, and maybe for you. And then I could maybe get everybody else to help out with that. Whenever we got back to Belfast, right before lockdown was happening, I met an old lady crossing the road, and she had 2 big bags of shopping, and I was waiting to cross the road too, and got talking, and I said, "Are you getting ready for lockdown?" She goes, "Yeah." I said, "Do you think it'll be for a long time?" And she goes, "I think it will." So I thought this was going to be like back in the war, because Belfast was heavily bombed in World War II. She goes, "I thought it was going to be like that, but it's not. Because back then, everybody tried to see how they could help. But look around now, everybody's just trying to see what they can get away with." And I hope that this book does one thing. It's to try and help people go from thinking what they can get away with to how they can help. The end. I know I spelt it wrong. Okay. And I think I'm being joined on stage now. Here we come. Okay, I'm just going to sit down.
Hello.
Thank you. Hello.
Oliver, thank you for that beautiful talk, and I'm so glad you read the book for us.
Yes.
I really...
Yeah, I wasn't sure if I was going to do that, but
Oh my goodness.
it went on longer than I thought, sorry.
So I'm so looking forward to talking about this book and being in conversation with you. So pleased to be here tonight. Really quickly, I wanted to say thank you to Avery for your beautiful poem. I cannot wait to see what else you create. And just for quick housekeeping, if you have a question for Oliver, please head over to the Q&A link. It's in your pre-event email, and I've already seen some wonderful questions come in, and I would love to see yours. So Oliver, I loved hearing about how you choose to do your part in a very broken world using your specific skills. And what strikes me more than anything is just this sense of hope. It comes through in your book, it came through in your talk. Do you feel like you've always been such an optimistic person?
I think I do think I've always been an optimistic person. Even when it goes back to my mum had MS, and I have no memory of her walking, and she was bedridden for the last 10 years of her life. And when we asked her, "How are you, Mum?" she would always say, "Great," and she meant it, because she was like, "You know what? You choose to pick your own priorities." And she was like, "I get to see the sunrise another day, and I get to see my 4 boys another day." So she genuinely believed she was great. And I think there was just that willingness to find beauty everywhere. But also, I think with the short attention span, we kind of forget all that has gone well, all that is working. It's just the bad news happens quickly and good news happens slowly. So it's just easy to see the noise of what's going wrong. But, there's an essay at the back of the book, and it goes into this, that if you take, maybe with the exception of climate, but if you take any of the other issues that we're facing that are, ripe for contention and a lot of anger about, if you take any of those and you compare them to 50 years ago or even 100 years ago, things are noticeably different, and there is a lot of anger, but that's a vast improvement on apathy or even ignorance. So the opposite of love is not hate, it's indifference.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that. I think that's really beautiful, especially about your mom. And
And I say something in the book which is like, just as a small example of how much life has actually improved. Kids' books as an industry are only about 100 years old. You know why? Because before that, kids didn't live predictably long enough to warrant getting their own books.
Yes. And you have made such a beautiful body of work with your picture books, and your voice spans so many different topics and many different messages. One thing I've noticed is that you are very careful with your words. Like, I appreciate your distinction between illustrator and artist. I've also noticed that you've been careful to call yourself a picture book artist rather than a children's book artist.
Well, because I've never intended these books to be for children. I started off as art, and I think the fact that they work so well for children shows a lot about my sense of humor and maturity level. But I do think, and you know, it's like as in art, in the same way as like I don't think to myself, okay, what stories do kids want to hear, and they make those. It's more like I've got an audience of one in mind, and it's the memory I have of myself as a child, and if it works to satisfy that, and also it works to satisfy me as an adult, that's my test audience.
And that's your voice, essentially. I think one question that we had come in from Kenji is, your voice is so unique, it appeals to children and adults. It's sad but hopeful on a scale that's universal and personal. How did you find that writing voice?
It's mostly a Belfast accent, I think. Okay, so I answer this question when I go into art college students. You know, how did you find your style? It's like, you don't find your style. Your style finds you. You just have to get out of its way. You have to get out of your own way. So how do you find your voice? You see things and you think about things and you look at things and then you decide what you have to say about them, what you show about them. And I think that art is one of the only industries where the more selfish you are, the more generous you are. And I find my voice by just being willing to be very publicly vulnerable about, here's an experimentation of how I feel about this thing, and let everybody watch.
Yeah, you know, I think that, you know, being so vulnerable allows you to talk about some very weighty subjects.
Sure, yeah.
Yeah, and, you know, it makes sense. I love seeing how having your son and your daughter, you know, essentially created some of the books that you made. Mm-hmm. But do you think that you've always felt this sense of responsibility even before then, with your storytelling
What
platform?
responsibility are we talking about here? No, I don't feel any sense of responsibility in a way that, like, I'm not a bad person, so I'm not gonna say or do anything that's offensive or anything like that. But it's in a strange way. There's a freedom in my books because, and this is gonna come across bad maybe, but I say this to our college students: the only way you can get to where you need to be is you gotta stop caring what other people think. And it's the same way of saying is like, you know, you got to be selfish about your art. But a lot of people who kind of come up to me and say is like, oh, I'm crippled by self-doubt and everything. I was like, okay, picture in your head the person whose validation is it you seek. And I bet you can't come up with anybody.
So, you know, we actually had a couple questions come in about, you know, people who have always wanted to do art but were afraid to do so. Others who wanted to know, how did you know that this is what you always wanted to do? And you mentioned that you fell into art, so you didn't intentionally set out to do picture books.
I mean, art does run in my family, but to get back to that, like, you want to do art but you're too afraid to try. Somebody once asked me at a literary festival, what do you do if you get writer's block? And it's the same answer for that. You remember you'll be dead soon. And nobody is going to do it for you.
It's like hopeful and morbid at the same time.
Completely. But the other one is like, how did I fall into it? I suppose that is partly, I was a product of integrated education in Northern Ireland, is one of the reasons that I think it went this direction, and my parents. So integrated education in Northern Ireland, I went to the first integrated secondary school in Northern Ireland. And there's still only 10% of schools are integrated. And let me explain what integration means to you. Actually, better than that, I'm a patron now for integrated education in Northern Ireland. And when I got the letter, I had in my Brooklyn studio, I had a young African-American intern from Atlanta. And she opened it and she's like, integrated education, what does this mean? I was like, it means two different types of white Christians with slightly different origin stories disagree on putting their kids to school. Oh, this is ridiculous. And actually it was the moment of power of that gave me the idea of how to treat all of the conflicts in the book, Meanwhile Back on Earth. Can you look at any conflict and speak about it with enough absurdity to point out the absurdity?
So, you know, that I love that because I've heard you say more than once, I'm from planet Earth, rather than I'm from...
Yes, and that's not as wishy-washy as it sounds, because it is, I have 4 passports, which I probably shouldn't say.
No, I want to hear about them.
I was born in Northern Ireland to Catholic parents, and Northern Ireland is part of the United Kingdom, and that's by the way, which, the United Kingdom? Okay. Well, but you know, that's... The mindset of cheering one half of that is part of the problem. But so the United Kingdom is primarily, it was a British majority back then, and I remember there was a World Cup qualifying game between Northern Ireland and the Republic of Ireland, and the Republic of Ireland is a different country with a different currency, different postal system, different television system, different education system, but yet all my Catholic friends were like, no, we go for the Republic of Ireland. I was like, but that's another country. I don't understand. And it always felt very confusing to me. And then especially when I went to England and we weren't treated as British either. They're like, F off back to Paddyland, you Mick. And it was, and then whenever I commented on the Queen dying, because I got the MBE from the Queen, and it was like, I think she did a lot of good for the world. And loads of people were saying, it was like, you don't know what it's like to come from a colonized country. And I was like, hello? The first and longest colonized country? But so there was this sense of national identity that was very confusing. And I thought a lot that Samuel Johnson, the American politician, said, patriotism is the last refuge of the scoundrel.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's so telling that, you have so many different places that you could call home, and you choose to say we, right?
Well, I do make it slightly easier. I revert back to the old city-state. So I say to people, I've got a hat that says B, and when I'm in Northern Ireland, I say it's for Brooklyn, and when I'm in Brooklyn, I say it's for Belfast. So,
So, I think that a lot of people were struck by the message of this book. And you've mentioned that artists or storytellers should play this leading role in potentially climate change or global conflict through storytelling. Mm-hmm. And so a couple people, including Jessica and Joe, wanted to know how. So Joe said, if we could all walk away from today's event doing something towards being a global citizen or supporting our planet, what would you hope for that thing to be? What would that look like?
Well, I think it has to be that the mindset of twofold. The larger goal of trying to get from how can I help to there from what can I get away with. But I think the bigger part of it is applied empathy. It's you don't know anybody's life story. You don't know what they're grasping at. People need the sense of belonging, and I think that this sense of whenever anybody does become really depressed or really extreme, it's because they've been left out of the collective story of modernism that is accelerating past what we as a species can keep up with. So you have to be gentle with everyone, for we all carry a great weight. And reframe the story differently. And I was mentioning this, and I hadn't thought about it in a while, but do you remember the 2016 election? There was the coal mining was the poster child of the forgotten people, and liberals were like, yeah, well, coal mining's bad, it's destroying the planet, and a lot of coal miners were like, don't tell me what to do, and it was this real strife. But in thinking about that differently, what about instead of saying you're irrelevant, the powers that be had said, thank you, that mission is now complete, we need you for a new mission. Just bring people with you, include people.
Right, I think, I like that you talk about looking at motivation rather than people's actions, right? Yeah. And I think that so much of that is assuming best intentions. And I think that's just a really beautiful part about how you've made this book. Actually, my favorite spread in here is the one where you talk about how we are all trees in the forest, no one more important than the other.
Yeah, I think that's probably one of the most important spreads in that book. And the other one is the who can you tell it to? I think just remembering that is actually what we want. It's not about stuff, or it's not about money. The idea of growth being this financial goal for all companies is growth. When you look at things biologically, uninterrupted growth is also called cancer.
That's true. I love hearing authors and illustrators and artists' favorite spreads of their book, because it's like they're all kind of our children, each spread a different one.
No, some of them are filler.
Right, but we certainly have our favorites. And I think it's telling which one we choose to be like, oh, that's the one.
I was doing that event with Owen Colfer when his sons, and there was like thousands of school kids, and the people could get up to a microphone and ask questions. And this one schoolboy came up and said, and it was in Dublin where he's from. It was like, excuse me, Mr. Colfer, I believe you have 2 children. And he knew straight away it was one of his children. And he was like, I believe you have 2 children. Which one is your favorite? And he goes, the other one.
Oh, no. Right, and you have 20 books that are all, in a way, your children.
Yeah, my diplomatic answer is always the most recent one, which doesn't really work for children, because then it's like whoever's the youngest. Actually, you know, I think probably historically speaking, the youngest always is everybody's favorite, but I'm not the youngest. I'm the oldest, or the second oldest of four. But I do say that I've got different books that I love in different ways, like How to Catch a Star, because it was my first one, Lost and Found, because it was probably one of the more difficult ones to figure out how to make a book. But the Book Eating Boy I love because nobody wanted me to make that book. I had to really go out on a limb. But I've got a special place in my heart, especially at the minute, for The Fate of Fausto.
So I read, Oliver, that for How to Catch a Star, you submitted 100 dummies, and dummy is kind of the sample book that you pitched to publishers in order to get it published. So to me, as a fellow picture book maker, that is an intentional act. How did you know that this is what I want to do?
Well, the way I do anything is like, where do I want to be, and then work backwards from there. I was like, if I want to get a book published, how does that happen? Somebody has to, you have to, and whoever says never judge a book by its cover, everybody does that. That's why there's designers.
We are visual people.
We are visual people. It's a terrible analogy. So I decided to make a really nice presentation that couldn't be ignored and send it. And I made 100 packets, but I only sent out 5 because I heard from 2 publishers pretty much right away, and then I gave the rest away to family and friends. But you know, it's like I keep asking the publishers, like, has anybody ever sent in a submission the way I did? And they're like, no, and that was 20 years ago.
Right. I mean, I think like
to put a bit of consideration into it.
No, that's a lot of effort, and I feel like that speaks in
but it worked.
Itself. Yeah. And you know, so you tackle your many different disciplines probably similarly.
Yeah. If I don't do it, who else is going to do it? Like it's a matter of, if I want this to happen, it's up to me. I scraped by our college, thinking I was like, I'm fooling them. You know, I'm getting just enough marks to get by. And then I took a year off and I went and tried to be an actual artist in the real world and realized just enough to get by doesn't really count in the real world. And I learned a very, very valuable lesson that year, which is you only get out what you put in.
Right, especially as an artist of any type.
Well, yes, but as a human being, you only get out what you put in.
So, you know, that makes me wonder, you do so many different disciplines. We've seen some of your sculptures, some of your paintings. This audience clearly knows about your picture books. How do you decide what to go for, what to spend your time on? You know, especially in saying you only get out what you put in. It requires some real intentional movement there.
Yeah. It's like, you know, you go to the circus or one of those, like, you know, talent shows and you see somebody spinning plates. It's a bit like that. And then occasionally, or actually maybe it's more like air traffic control and circling planes, and every so often you have to bring one down to land, and so then all the attention turns to that. But I'm working on a schedule. I've got sort of 2 calendars in my head. The next 4 days, and then I vaguely know what's happening in the next week. I could tell you the broad strokes of the next year, but I'm already starting to plan like the very broad strokes of 5 years away.
I mean, that's a lot. I assume that's because there's so many things that you're juggling at any one time.
And so much of it is raw potential. And then I have to weigh up, is this thing going to be worth my effort in getting there? And half the time I get some ways down a project which could be quite good and be like, it's not. There's something else that's squealing for attention more.
So what is worth that? What makes it worth it?
Okay, I think about it like this. I think about the joy of making something. The reach it might have, but also then the impact that it might have. And right now, impact, I think, is prioritizing over everything else.
You know, so a couple people asked about your dipped paintings,
Yeah.
and I can see why that has touched people.
Yeah.
You know, it kind of gives you a visceral reaction, and I think you kind of showed it, but Oliver has, you know, these portraits that he's fully painted.
Yeah, and to your point, you know, it was like for a while I was like, look, I really can paint, and you know, even one of my portraits is hanging in the National Portrait Gallery in London. But yes, they're fully painted and then submerged as part of a ceremony. There's 20 of them now, and I do need to bring them to completion at some point.
Oh, so this is still ongoing?
It's still ongoing, yeah.
Okay.
Because I worked out what the very last one was after I'd done the first one.
I see.
But I'm not going to tell you.
Yeah, so you do have fans of the dipped paintings here, but you do so much more. And I've noticed that you've kind of paired some gallery or installation work with some of your book subjects recently.
Yeah, that's something that's happened because, before Here We Are, it was like, this is the book world and this is the art world. And actually, 20 years ago when I was starting off and I wanted to be an artist, I would get some traction with galleries, and then they'd find out, oh, wait, you're the same guy who does the books, and they'd lose interest because illustration and bookmaking and picture books were not kind of fashionable back then, and so the gallery world definitely looked down their nose. Yep. So I had to have that degree of separation, and so I thought of things very much in terms of projects. But now it's different from that. So there's a lot of through lines through all of the things. So last year there was Our Place in Space, the scale model of the solar system. At the same time, there was an exhibition in Boston about looking at the depths of the cosmos with some pedestrian anchor to Earth, and then a mural at the side of the Gardner Museum, and Meanwhile Back on Earth, which were 4 things, very, very different projects, but all kind of about the same thing. So it's a concept, and then what are the tentacles out of that concept?
Right, and you did one for the ghost book, right? The gallery showed like Afraid of Ghosts.
Yeah, Afraid of Ghosts, which was my favorite thing that I learned that year. The collective noun for a group of ghosts is afraid of ghosts. That's true. But yeah, that was a funny one because the ghost book itself was partly out of the joy of craft, like painting ghosts into empty rooms is a lot of fun to do. And my reputation in my household is that I am absolutely terrible at looking for things. My wife jokes that I couldn't find the other end of a hose, which did actually happen once, but it went through a hedge. So combining those things, but then playing about with technically how will this work if I want to place the ghost on the page. So doing a lot of experiments, and I ended up painting ghosts a lot. And I just come from doing this show of like the cosmos and everything, and that was like the For All We Know show, and that was before COVID. And then during COVID, I was doing all these ghosts sitting inside, but the fact that I was just sort of painting them just as a test at the start, they were all kind of just doing really boring things. And I had a very profound thought that, we're fascinated and terrified by ghosts in all cultures, and fascinated because we don't like the idea that it just ends, but terrified because we don't like what we don't understand. And say there was an afterlife, what's to say it's not an extension of the way you actually spend your life? So I painted all these ghosts like waiting for the phone to ring or looking for keys, and just if that's what awaited you for eternity, would it make you spend the life that you do get a little differently?
And I like that during the pandemic they were relegated to indoors just like we were.
Yeah.
It was a parallel universe, ghost universe. So, that makes me wonder about your process in working. So making art, whether it's for fine art, picture books, it can be a very independent process. You could disappear inside your cave for a very long time and then emerge with a whole body of art. So does that fit you? Does that suit you? Or do you seek out collaboration?
No, I don't seek out collaboration. Through just mutual conversations with friends, like an idea will happen in a conversation, like, yeah, we probably should do something about that. But I haven't really said yes to a collaboration that's been pitched to me since the day the crayons quit.
Okay.
And there are definitely moments of the creative inspiration where it's just you have to figure out how you think about something, and that absolutely depends on silence and relatively uninterrupted time, which is really difficult with a 5-year-old and an 8-year-old. But then it moves into production at a certain point where it's like, okay, I know exactly what I'm doing, and now that needs to be done. And with that, it's a little less important than the fruition stage where you're interrupted, because it's slightly more, there's more of a flow to it. And you can even get some help with that, like with cleaning brushes or laying out paper, or even if it's like a really large painting, I can get somebody to like underpaint some of the block colors, just because I know it's like, right, that's got to be brown or whatever. So there's a small amount of delegation that can come into that occasionally, and then half the time it's just trying to make sense of how it all extends out into the world.
Yeah, I think there's a really beautiful ebb and flow to the creative process, right?
I'm glad it looks like that from the outside.
There's like this part where you consume so much information, and then you digest it, and you have to think.
Yeah.
And then the production can bring in more hands.
Yeah.
do I know that you've collaborated with Neil deGrasse Tyson and with you too. Do you find that?
And Neil Gaiman, I'd never collaborated with Neil deGrasse Tyson. That would be great, though.
Oh, I thought there was a book cover,
Oh, yeah,
or a
Neil
painting
Gaiman.
with stars.
Yeah.
Okay.
That was Neil Gaiman for the refugee project.
Oh, my apology.
But yes, but you two came about of a mutual conversation. Where people joke, it's like, oh, all Irish people know each other. And we're like, no, we don't. And then they'll say, somebody was like, oh, actually, I do know that guy. When there's little, like a book cover, that's, when I was talking to him, I was like, this seems like a sensible thing to do. But if it's a large scale project that I know is going to take up a huge amount of time, that's a very different decision-making process than a sketch or a drawing.
I see.
Yeah.
So I think we have time for just maybe a couple more questions.
Yep.
Let me look through this really quickly and see if there's
Just out of interest, how many people are practicing artists out there? There's a few, okay. How many librarians? A few. How many teachers? Okay. What other industry have I left out that feels underrepresented right now? Yep, there's one there. Well, is that not teaching and librarians crossed together? A librarian?
So
That's good work, though.
I have a couple more. Just
Yeah.
selfishly, I want to know, I know that even though you're publicizing this book now, you probably made it a couple years ago. What are you working on right now?
Well, this book is probably other than A Child of Books, which I made with Sam Winston, that took 5 years just because of a very complicated process. I've been working on this book practically for about 4 years. The fine art for it happened over the course of about a year, and it finished, about a year ago. But what am I working on now? That's a really good question. What am I working on now? Honestly, there's like 7 different massive projects, and right now it's where I'm having decisions because I work with my older brother and my wife and an assistant. So there's a team of us, and we still haven't figured out which plane we bring down next. But I think there might be a large-scale public art project in the UK that might take up a lot of our attention.
Oh, that's exciting. Is it related to the book?
Sort of, yes. But in the way that there's probably nothing that I will be able to do in the next few years that won't be related to that book, because it kind of covers a lot of ground.
It is very comprehensive.
Yeah.
So someone had this question that was quite popular, and I think we could end on that. Emma asked, when you feel your sense of hope dim, what do you turn to rekindle it?
What do I turn to rekindle it? I think it's that memory of my mum just saying, great. Sort of choosing what it is that will make you happy and find those little beautiful moments of joy and beauty and hope wherever you look for them.
I think that's so beautiful, and it really does give me an idea of the creator behind these books, of what fuels them and for what comes ahead, which I'm sure we're all so excited. So I just want to say thank you, Oliver Jeffers, for being in conversation with us tonight.
Thank you.
We're so happy to have you.
Thank you. Okay, yeah. Thanks, guys. It's the first time I've been in Seattle where it wasn't raining.